guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Brendan Kane. He's a business and growth strategist, also author of a book, 1 Million Followers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brendan.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your journey to, growth marketing.
Well, I've been in the digital and technology space for about 15 years now, and I got my start. I initially went to film school to learn the business side of film because I wanted to produce movies. And as soon as I got there, I realized they don't teach you anything about business in film school. So I figured the best way to learn about business is start your own. And the most cost-efficient way at the time, and it still holds true today, is to start internet companies. So while I was going to college, I just started experimenting, and I launched a few internet companies to just really learn how it worked and what it takes to actually build a business. And then when I moved out to LA to pursue a career in film back in 2005, it's when the entertainment industry started to reawaken to digital after that dot-com bust. And I'm just a huge proponent of how can you stand out and offer unique value to people at a higher level. And I just noticed that there was tens of thousands of people that wanted to be film producers, but there weren't a lot of people that understood how to maximize the value of digital and technology. So I basically used my experience in starting those companies to forge connections, get projects, and spent about 3.5, 4 years creating digital divisions for 2 movie studios and overseeing the theatrical release of campaigns from films ranging from $15 to $100 million budgets, which then afforded me the opportunity to work directly with actors, directors, and producers. And eventually I just hit a point where I realized it really wasn't cut out for the corporate world. And, people think the movie industry is some, sexy, creative industry, but it's just another corporation. So I felt like I was spending more time asking for permission to do things than actually doing things. So that's where I decided to branch off and become an entrepreneur and go down this path of more growth marketing. I built technology platforms and licensed them back to big media companies. Help build strategy for big celebrities and musicians and athletes, and just the progression from there grew. But that's initially how I got started in the space.
And that's what led to, I guess, your book. I mean, what's the inspiration behind that then?
So the inspiration is I'm very passionate about thought leadership and inspiring people to achieve their goals and their dreams. And I'd always wanted to do a book, but I didn't feel like I had a strong enough hook to bring people in. And that's actually what my whole second book is about to come out is this concept of hook points and how you stand out in very crowded and saturated markets. And that's what I've done over the course of my career that has allowed me to close clients like MTV, Viacom, Taylor Swift, all of that. And the way that the book came about is I had been working with a bunch of celebrities and journalists and corporations on growth, marketing for awareness, brand building, and follower growth. And, spent about 3 years doing it and got really good at it. And then I just thought, okay, well, what if I actually run an experiment on somebody starting from scratch, starting from zero? Because I always got asked the question, it's great, you work with MTV or Katie Couric or Taylor Swift, but couldn't it work for the average person? So I decided, okay, let me go off and run this experiment. And before I did it, though, I came up with a hook of 1 million followers in 30 days, and I ran it by a literary agent. And I said, okay, if I do this, will you sign me as a client and get me a publishing deal? And he said, yes, I think it's a great concept and great idea. So I didn't actually do the experiment until I knew that the hook was strong enough. And I talked to several people in influential positions to make sure. And that's where the motivation or the inspiration for the book came from, was I knew it was a strong hook that I could capture people's attention to teach them the real things that they need to know to be successful in this new world that we live in today.
So I have a question. What would you have done if you didn't reach 1 million followers? What was the backup plan?
Well, I knew I was going to do it. It wasn't a matter of like if I could do it. I knew I could do it because I'd been running all these experiments. So there wasn't a doubt in it, because again, I had spent 3 years refining these strategies and methodologies to get to that point.
Right. So one of the things I know on your journey to getting 1 million followers, you talked about not just gaining, followers in your domestic market, but looking at emerging markets too. So how important was that in getting to that number, and how important are those markets?
It's a great question. And Let me start with how important the markets are. It depends on the business. Like if you're a mom and pop shop or you're an e-commerce company that can only ship to specific geolocations, obviously emerging markets are not going to help you at all. But I come from the entertainment industry and specifically the film industry, and 60 to 70% of box office revenue is international versus domestic. People don't realize that. You have movies now that bomb here in the US, but just absolutely kill it overseas. And then if you just look at the larger ecosystem of the biggest corporations and brands in the world, you look at like a Nike, a Coke, a Facebook, a Google, they've saturated all of the domestic markets. They've saturated Europe and what you would probably label as a tier one country, where they see the biggest growth opportunity is in emerging markets. You look at India, for example, it's going to be the world's largest population in less than 5 years. There's 1.3 billion people in the company. Now you measure that against the scale of what's in the US. I mean, it's astronomically different. So you see like Facebook, their largest demographic for both Facebook and Instagram is actually India and these emerging markets. You see Google putting hot air balloons over Africa because they realize a third of the world's population is still not connected to the internet. And you look at like a Nike or a Pepsi or an Apple or even Netflix, they said their next 100 million subscribers are coming from India. So again, it depends on the market. It can be extremely valuable for people that are looking for global scale, for global brand recognition, because there's tremendous opportunity right now because most people will look down on people in India or Indonesia and Africa and basically say they're not real people, they're not real valuable. Now, is the average value per follower or user lower than you'll get in the US? Absolutely, but the scale is there. And I can definitively tell you the opportunity that presents itself today is not going to be there 3, 4, 5 years from now because everybody's going to catch on to it. So it's really understanding the differentiation based upon your business and your industry and whether it can add value to your audience. Now, I will say that sometimes what we'll do from an e-commerce perspective or a direct response perspective is we'll push content to emerging markets to build up cheap engagement against that post. And then once we have that engagement, then we'll redirect it to our core audience. And we just see that sometimes it'll increase our overall conversion and effectiveness of it because you have that validation and credibility around that post. It's like, if you can imagine a feed, an ad being seeded to your feed and having 10 likes versus 10,000 likes. It just adds that level of credibility and validation to it. So when I was producing followers for Facebook, I was, looking at that market heavily. I tested all markets around the world. So when I built 1 million followers, I built it in 100 different countries. And I really wanted to understand the correlative impact of different content, different messages based upon geolocation and what the effectiveness of getting somebody to opt in. Because I work with a lot of Fortune 500 and 100 companies. I work with a lot of global superstars that are looking for that global exposure. And I really wanted to test and understand and learn. And that's another big thing is sometimes there's a misconception of why I generated 1 million followers. It's not to make myself famous, not to make myself an influencer, but to experiment, to learn what it takes to grow so I can share that information with other people.
So you talk about the paid aspect. Well, we talked a little bit about emerging markets, but we want to talk about a little bit about paid versus organic. So, what about how do you weigh paid versus organic following, when it comes to social?
Well, paid, some people, and I think that there's a misconception or demonizing the word paid, paid versus organic. People say, well, if it's not done organically, it's not valuable. But if you actually look at all the biggest corporations in the world, you look at a Netflix, you look at a Nike, you look at an Apple, even look at like a Taylor Swift or like biggest global superstars, like look at like The Rock and Kim Kardashian that have over 100 million followers, and people say, oh, they did it organically. No, they didn't. They have like a rock movie. The average rock movie probably spends $50 million to $100 million marketing that movie. Kim Kardashian has all the brand endorsements that are advertising, and she's on television. They advertise those TV shows. It's a different type of paid, but it gives you paid. What paid does is it gives you distribution. When you're starting from scratch, it gives you the opportunity to seed your content, your brand, to an audience that is not aware of you. Now, typically the way that I think about paid and organic when we work with our clients is what is the level of your content creation capabilities? If you're a rock star content creator, you don't need paid. But a lot of people, are just starting out with content, or they're figuring out how to craft their message. And paid can be an amazing tool to first seed your content to certain audiences, but also to learn what messages work and what messages don't work. So we work both in the paid and organic side. With my team, I have paid specialists and I have organic specialists, and we also like to blend the mix of those two together to even drive results even further.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying, and one of the things with paid is you could actually use it as a test bed to get more information quicker than from an organic perspective when you're testing content, correct?
Absolutely. It's truly amazing, especially when you look at Facebook and Instagram's advertising platform. I think is kind of the most robust when it comes to this, but it serves as a market research tool. People look at these media buying platforms as media buying tools, which they are, and they're effective at that. But to me, the more value in it is the ability to leverage it as a market research tool, to be able to test content against different audiences, different locations, different interests, different purchase behaviors. That gives you immediate data back in real time. So leveraging it from an advertising perspective, if you do it strategically, can give you so much insight to drive both your short-term and long-term content strategy and business goals, and just increase your overall chances to be successful and win.
So then the paid really does benefit the organic in essence. They really work together.
Yes and no. There's, if you're running paid against content that's ineffective and you're not learning from that inefficiencies, then it's not going to help you regardless. And sometimes paid, if you're running bad content through it, can impact your standing in the algorithms, because the algorithms really control the distribution of organic reach. And that's where it's a lot of the testing that we do is we're measuring the correlative earned lift that we generate off the paid. And what that means is we're looking at how many people are actually sharing the content that we're pushing to them. Because if people are sharing it, it means the content's working, it's resonating, and you get that organic lift off of it. And it also demonstrates to the auctions and to the algorithms that you're a good advertiser and you're a good content creator. Now, the reverse side of that is if nobody's engaging your content, they're skipping over it, then it doesn't really help you at the end of the day from an organic perspective, and it can oftentimes hurt you.
So, Brian, I know you wanted to ask this question about influencers. Go ahead.
So, well, I mean, so here's the thing, right? We talked about Facebook as a channel and Instagram. How important is it to have, I guess, diversity of followers, right? Is it more important and I know they accomplish different things, but is it more important to have a lot of followers in one channel? Because we see a lot of people focus on one channel at a time, and some do try to spread it. Or is it more important to have a sum total of followers across multiple, channels, let's say?
My perspective is start with one channel and get really good at it. Just dive in deep and understand how to get good at it, because people will spread themselves too thin and they'll just put content everywhere, and it just doesn't focus them on how to make one channel successful, and thus you never really get good at it. And if you do one channel very successfully, you can build an entire brand and career off of it. That's not to say that once you get good at one platform that you can diversify off to other platforms. Like my first experiment was on Facebook, then it was Instagram, and now we're going into YouTube. So we are constantly looking and learning at other platforms, but unless you have a big team and a team that's specialists in different areas, I'd focus on one and get really good at it and then move to the next one.
So while we're on the topic of influencers, then which, in your opinion, which channels are the best to monetize if you're an influencer?
Depends on the type of monetization you're going after. So you look at Instagram, for example, it's kind of like the hottest one for brand deals and doing deals for that. Now, obviously, brand deals and influencer marketing is very saturated at this point. So it's harder to get bigger deals and stand out in that market. YouTube's a great platform from an ad revenue perspective of monetizing. There is still some brand deals there. It's not as big as it once was when they got hit with the brand safety issues. Facebook, you can make some good money off of ad revenue as well. The brand deals are not as strong. So really it depends on like how you plan on monetizing. What does that monetization strategy look like? Because there's many different ways to make money online, especially if you're an influencer. And I often find that that influencers that think bigger, like I have a friend that I'm working on a project with who was one of the biggest YouTubers back 5 or 6 years ago. And what she understood is like, listen, I'm making good money off of YouTube, but if I really want to accelerate to that next level, I need to think bigger. And then she created an e-commerce company off the back of her audience and the influencers that she knew that's now valued at $2 billion. So that's kind of where my mind goes. And it's more interesting to me is like when I'm building followers or helping people build followers, it's like, I don't really think like just being an influencer is really the best path. I think thinking bigger of how you can maximize it for larger opportunities is really where the true revenue lies. And that can be maximized really off of any of the platforms.
Right. Which is why big companies use influencers to get their brand out, because they know at the end of the day, the sales are coming through it. And it's really the influencer then doing it almost for themselves is what I'm hearing. Correct?
Yeah, and for brands, it's like, and it's the advice that I give a lot of people is when you're just starting out, go where the traffic is, don't create it from scratch.
Mhm.
And that's where influencers work. But also if you're trying to become an influencer, that strategy is important to you of how you can grow your audience.
So what do you mean? Where the traffic is? Give me an example.
I'll give you a few examples. First off, people don't really understand how YouTube was sold for $1.6 billion in less than 2 years. And it was because they just harnessed all of MySpace's traffic. So at the time, MySpace didn't have a video player. So YouTube created one of the first embeddable video players for the purpose of giving MySpace profile users the ability to embed video on their profile. And then when your friends saw you had a video player, everybody wanted when they clicked the YouTube link and they did it. So they basically leveraged that traffic from MySpace to drive back to YouTube. Airbnb is another example, is they leveraged and harnessed Craigslist traffic. So when that first launched is they would reach out on Craigslist for people renting out their property and said, hey, you should sign up for Airbnb because it's much safer. We have insurance and these protection and it'll make it easier and you'll make more money. Then they would get those people to create an Airbnb listing. And then what Airbnb did is reposted those listings on Craigslist with that new link to drive traffic back. Mm. Similar strategy for how we grow on Instagram. We'd syndicate content out onto other Instagram accounts that have large following to direct traffic back. So that's what I mean kind of by harnessing, traffic to benefit your brand and your growth.
So if you had to give someone, I guess circling back to the book, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to, gain 1 million followers?
Well, first is understanding why. Why do you want 1 million followers? What is that going to do for you? What is it going to do for your career? What is it going to do for your business? Do you even need 1 million followers? Or is it 50,000 or 100,000? Because it can definitively tell you it's, the process to follow is simple, but it's not easy. It's hard work. And you have to understand from a mindset perspective why you're doing what you're doing. And it's amazing to me how many people don't even stop to ask themselves that question. Because you're going to get into a situation where it's going to be hard and you're going to want to give up. And if you don't have that solid foundation under you, then you're ultimately not going to be successful. Still to this day of doing this for 15 years, I constantly get that self-doubt and want to give up. But because I have a solid foundation of understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing, what that return on investment looks like, and what the long-term strategy is that keeps me going. And the financial part of it is super important. It's how is this going to be sustainable for you? And that investment doesn't have to be financial. It can be time. It's like some influencers just put in the time and grow organically, but that takes away time from other stuff of how you can make money. Or if you're making a financial investment in it, it's like, where is that return on investment going to come from and how quickly is it going to pay off? Because again, if it's not sustainable, ultimately you will give up.
Well, you talked about challenges, right? And sometimes things don't work. What are some of those challenges that you encounter along the way?
Well, there's always things that don't work. I mean, we run into this every single day. Challenges, a campaign doesn't work, content doesn't work, algorithms shift, formats shift, themes shift. All of those things, happen on a daily basis. And that's where, setting that solid foundation from a mindset perspective, but also understanding that you're a student of the game and to be constantly learning. and processing information and growing. They're featured in the book, but I have friends that are far more successful than me at digital and social, people that have generated billions of dollars of revenue, people that generate tens of millions of followers on their own accounts. And the reoccurring theme across all of them is they are constantly testing and learning. They do not stop. They're not content because they know it can shift and it can change. But because they have that solid foundation of constantly pushing themselves forward, that sets themselves up for long-term success.
So Brian, am I missing anything? I know you were super excited. Brian, as soon as he got your book, he was like, "You've got to hear this."
I didn't read it. I've listened to it, but because these days I feel like I don't know if I have time to read anything, but I'd listen to it. It was a great book. I mean, I suggest everyone check it out. Brendan, I don't know if you want to tell our viewers where where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, they can, if they want to learn more about me, they can go to my website. It's brendanjkane.com, and it's spelled BRENDAN. They can direct message me on Instagram at Brendan Kane. If they want to check out the book, it's in all major retail stores on Amazon, or they can go to book.1millionfollowers.com, and one is spelled out. There we have a free book shipping and handling offer with some additional bonuses that you can opt in for to dive deeper into the book if that's helpful.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
You mentioned one more thing. You mentioned
Yeah.
a book coming out, right? A follow-up book. When is that coming out?
It'll be launched probably in the next 4 to 5 weeks, and it's called Hook Point: How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. And again, it's like everything that I've talked about and all the success that I have is because I've been able to find unique ways to differentiate myself and my clients in crowded markets. Because as you may know, there's over 60 billion messages sent on digital platforms each day. You're no longer just fighting for attention against your direct competition. You're fighting against everything else. You're fighting against Kim Kardashian, The Rock, the latest Paramount movie, the news, all of that stuff. And you have to find ways to differentiate yourself to stand out in the micro attention world that we live in. We often find that you have less than 3 seconds to capture somebody's attention. And that's where it's like we feel that there's tremendous value that we can offer people out there by developing hook points for them and helping them understand how to capture that attention. Because there's a lot of great information and valuable information of branding and positioning and, like Simon Sinek's your purpose and your why. But at the end of the day, none of that can be effective if you can't capture somebody's attention. If you can't win that first 3 seconds, you'll never get to your product or your service. You'll never get to your why or any of those foundational elements of your brand. So that's what the whole book is about, teaching people of how to think about that, how to create them. And then, we actually help people and do it for them for people that need that additional assistance. So people can reach out to me on Instagram or through my website if they want to learn more about that.
And I do want everybody to go get the book, but I would could you share, without going too much, an example of one of those hook points? I'm curious. That's so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can share as much information as you like. I mean, one of the perfect examples is 1 million followers in 30 days. That's a hook point. That hook point led to a best-selling book, literary agent, publishing deal, speaking around the world, receiving over 16,000 applications in a matter of a few months of people wanting to work with me. So that's an example of a hook. Now, other examples is Tesla, for example, the ugly truck, the Cybertruck. Like, people think that he purposely designed it to be ugly to stand out. And if you look at it, it was wildly successful. They had hundreds of thousands of pre-orders in a matter of time. You look about becoming an influencer. Becoming an influencer is huge. It's like there's a YouTube account called 10-Second Songs, where it's a musician that takes a cover song, but every 10 seconds he switches it up with an impersonation. So he'll take a Katy Perry song, and for 10 seconds he'll do it as Michael Jackson or Taylor Swift, or those different ways. And you want to look at Amazon, for example. Amazon is a master of hooks. So their first hook was the world's largest bookstore. And then they moved into clothing. Then they went into 2-day shipping. And then they went into Prime and one-click checkout. And they launched, the Echo and the Kindle. They're a master of it. Netflix is a master of it as well when they took on Blockbuster. No late fees was their first big one. And then they went to where their current focus is their original content. They spend $17 billion a year in original content because each one of those is a hook into their service and into their brand.
All right. Thank you for sharing. So thanks again. And everybody go check out the book and the upcoming book.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you guys for having me.